Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. We have an extraordinary panel today. The Executive Director of NMHC's Technology Transformation Center, the CEO of a 57-year-old development association, and ICSC's research chief who says people who don't know how to use AI will be replaced by people who do. If that doesn't capture where CRE is headed in 2026, I don't think anything will. So we'll kick it off with a quick round of introductions, 30 seconds each. Tell us what you do, and then your 3 words of your 2026 CRE strategy. Kevin, we'll kick it off with you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sandeep. It's great to be with you all. Really excited to kick off 2026 with this group with a lot of energy. I sit as the Executive Director and Chief Advocacy Officer for the Real Estate Tech and Transformation Center. We're an affiliate of NMHC, so really focused on the rental housing landscape, but more broadly at just the intersection of real estate and tech. And I think we're really bullish about the way tech is transforming almost every line of business that our members are operating in, the experience our residents are having. And I think if I have to drill down into 3 words of where we're going in 26, I think it's AI scales rapidly.
Stephanie, over to you.
Sure. So I'm Stephanie Cegielski. I am the Vice President of Research and Public Relations for ICSC. We are the member organization for the retail real estate and marketplaces industry. So we represent all the places that you go to shop, dine, work out, and all those tenants, financiers, et cetera. We are incredibly optimistic about 2026. As far as technology goes, I think that there's no turning back would be my 3 words, and just embrace it and use it.
Love that. No turning back. Mark, bring us home.
I'm going to have to try to outdo no turning back. But I'm Marc Selvitelli. I am the president and CEO of NAIOP. We are the Commercial Real Estate Development Association, 22,000 members throughout North America, representing developers in a number of asset classes, whether it be the green shoe right now of data centers, office development, industrial. A lot of our members mix in other asset classes as well, too. I would say if we're looking for the 3 words in 2026, I'm going to challenge an axiom that's been in real estate forever, which has been location, 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 and instead say that for 2026 and probably beyond, it's energy, energy, energy.
Oh, I love that. Never turn back. AI scales fast. Sorry, is that what you said, Kevin?
I said rapidly, but
AI
you get
scales
the point. Yeah.
rapidly. That's great. I pulled away AI scales fast, which is about the same. And it's no longer location, location, location. That was so 2025. Ugh. Who wants that anymore? It's energy, energy, energy. Okay, well, I am so excited about these 3 words. So we've got quick ratings 1 to 10. 2026 market optimism. 1, extremely pessimistic. 10, extremely optimistic. Any order.
Yeah, I'll give you an 8. Well, I think compared to where we've been recently, I'll go with an 8.
I'll tick a little lower. Although I'm anxious to hear the VP of Research at ICSC on this one, but I'm going to go with a 7. We'll stop there.
I would say an 8. From our perspective, things are strong, almost too strong, if you will.
Too strong. That's 3 fairly similar scores. So going back, reality check, lightning round. AI delivering real ROI. Do we think that's super unlikely or highly likely?
So I think it depends how you're using AI. And I don't think any 2 organizations are using it the same at the moment. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to measure. If you're using it internally to write marketing emails, you can measure that and it's a higher engagement. If you're using it to try to land deals, I don't know as though that's going to have the same ROIs. For me, it depends on what you're trying to measure and how you're using it.
So 1 to 10, Stephanie.
I'll say a 5 on that one.
Okay, 50.
I mean, we're still, AI's been around for a while. I mean, think about it. IBM Watson back in the 2012, 2013 won on Jeopardy. AI's been around that long. It's just really sort of started taking off. And I think we all need to figure out how it works best for our business strategy.
Makes perfect sense. Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, I largely I agree with that. I think as long as it has been around, as Stephanie points out, we're still very much in the early testing, piloting phase. So I think ROI is not something, and when I talk to C-suite leaders across the industry, it's not something that is going to be as immediate as they want. I think it's something they're going to have to test and play with, be willing to risk and ultimately see those returns. And I think we're seeing some clear examples of early adopters starting to turn the curve on profitability or returns. but it's not going to be as quick and easy as some of us would like to see.
So not an 8 or a 9. Where do you think you're shaking out?
Probably a 6 or a 7. I think, we're still midway through this race, but I think those who get, ahead quickly will definitely demonstrate some strong returns.
Yeah. Mark?
All right, well, I'm going to be the contrarian to the real estate tech center here, but I'm going to go with the 3 Sandeep. And the reason right now is I still think that this is a little bit of separating the wheat from the chaff. There's still a lot out there, and there's a lot that's unknown. And right now, almost everything looks like bright, shiny new toy, and that we really want it. And I still think that there's a little bit of hesitancy with go back to when the internet first came in. The old saying that I remember hearing in school was junk in, junk out. And how much junk is getting put into the AI right now that's then producing junk that we're seeing. And I still see and hear hesitancy with that. And part of it is that's with me as well, too.
Yeah. So for our audience here, what I'm hearing is a range of cautious to cautiously optimistic. There is no full diving into the water, but there's it could probably do some things. It remains to be seen. And maybe 2026 is the year when we truly start seeing it produce some better results. All right. Capital availability. 1, totally unavailable. 10, very available.
So I'm hesitant to put a number on it. I think it is available. I think it's just still expensive. And I say expensive, but that's a relative term because it is not expensive like 1984 expensive. It's expensive in our unrealistic COVID expectations of when it was free. So I think it's available. I'm not certain that they want to dive in and use it quite yet.
Yeah, the good COVID days.
The good COVID days. I mean, listen, if you are in a high yield APR right now, a high yield savings account, you are loving this. If you're looking to borrow money, you're not loving it quite as much.
Yeah. I guess I'll come at it from 2 ways. One is I think the capital constraints or challenges, our members have faced. I think everyone's waiting for lower rates or this surge that's going to send us back into production mode. I think we're all still anticipating that. But the other side of it for RETC is really looking at the prop tech and capital flows into the tech space that ultimately backs up all of us in operations. In some estimates, 25 say that we've seen north of 16 billion in capital just flowing into these tech solutions and products. And I think when you layer that with the potential, Mark may disagree, but the potential for ultimate savings or ROI, I think the runway is strong for capital to keep coming into the market and being a game changer.
Yeah, actually, our members, we do a twice annual survey of our members, our sentiment index, and our members are actually rather optimistic about the capital markets for the next 12 months. Now, I think part of that is the pessimism that was there at the beginning of last year in terms of where we were sitting. We were hoping for Fed cuts, but we didn't know if they were going to come. We've now seen a few. And, I think that that's helping start to grease the wheels on the market. But to Stephanie's point, I do believe what she said was correct. There's a lot of capital that's out there, but there's a perception that it's not cheap. And that's because we're sitting on really low rates in a lot of previous deals, and giving that up is a problem.
Yeah. So all in all, I'm still hearing a lot more optimism as compared to 2025, especially early 2025 in terms of capital availability. I hope you're all correct.
So do we.
Yeah, I want to be correct too.
All right. So I'm curious to dig in a little bit deeper into the various sectors. Kevin, why does multifamily remain resilient despite everything?
Look, I think the blessing or the curse is that this nation is in a historical, housing affordability challenge. And that really stems from underproduction, a lot of housing challenges across this country, which were once perceived to just be an urban core issue, are really in communities of all types at this point. The lack of affordability, the lack of access to attainable housing, whether it's in the single family market, the multifamily market, it's a big problem. And I think for us, that has been a driver of demand. I mean, the vacancy rates in most markets, super tight. I don't see anything really changing that. I think you've seen examples of where the local officials or governments have been willing to push back and take on the NIMBY movement in many cases and see progress. I think Austin is a shining example of where we've seen rent declines because we've seen massive housing production come online in the multifamily market. I think a lot of localities really need to look at that model, breaking down barriers to development and ultimately benefiting the community's renters. But I think you see other communities going the opposite direction, imposing really harsh regulation or restrictions on development or operation that are pushing investors out of these markets. And that's only going to worsen the situation. So multifamily remains resilient overall, but we are not without our challenges in the long term.
Yeah, we recently did a study on how much cost the regulations were adding to the investor or developer in multifamily in particular. And Atlanta, for example, was a 30% cost, which I thought was extremely high, which is where we're based out of. But then we went to LA and we're like, oh my goodness, how does anyone even build here? Then we went to Seattle. It's like, this sounds impossible.
Yeah.
How does one make money?
Yeah, we did a study just last year with NMHC and the National Association of Home Builders that showed on average across the country, 42% of the development and operations costs come down to regulation. I mean, folks need to really pay attention to that number, and it's gotten a lot of pickup in media and press, but you're exactly right. You go into specific markets and it's far higher than 42% in some cases. And these are the same policymakers who are coming after us on affordability. And, the friction point, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we've been on a long-term education campaign on this. But and I think Marc can probably speak to this a lot, is what our members collectively in the real estate development space are facing in terms of entitlement and new permitting fees. The policymakers see us as a cash cow. And that's unfortunate because it's going to ultimately undermine the promise of the momentum we could put out in the market.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I can just add on to that, Sandy, just because Kevin raised it, and I think he's 100% correct here. We're seeing almost this fighting interest, so to speak, where we see a lot of government officials asking for affordable housing, and they're not wrong. The problem is that the regulatory environment is so difficult to work in. And it varies locality to locality. That's the beauty of the way the U.S. system is set up. But it does create tremendous challenges in being able to make projects pencil out. And that's a problem. Developers aren't in this to run around like Mr. Monopoly. Yes, we want to make money. I think every business wants to turn a profit, but it also isn't a license to print money either. And, the misperception that developers are coming in and just ruining communities and paving a parking lot paving paradise rather to put up a parking lot is just fundamentally not true.
Yeah, Marc, thank you for keeping us all sober here. So for everyone listening in, this is the tagline, at least that I'm taking away, that we need to put everywhere for every jurisdiction, legislation. Developers are not minting money. That's a lot of hard work that goes into make these deals pencil. So adding more on top is just not going to cut it. So I did have a question for you, Marc. What's going on with the industrial and office dynamics? Which one do you think is winning?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, because if you took a look at the national media landscape, you would think that Chicken Little was having a field day. The sky is absolutely fallen on office. It's never coming back. It's a terrible investment and it's just going to lose money. I will tell you that narrative is beyond false. And I'm not going to say that just because I have jaded perspective about who some of our members are. We got the data to back it up. For the first time in a couple of years now, we do, in addition to our sentiment survey, we also do an office demand forecast in the second and fourth quarter of each year. And our latest office demand forecast, for the first time in a while, showed positive net absorption. And it is also forecasting positive net absorption for 2026. Now, could that be scaled back a little bit? Sure. I mean, it does depend upon a multitude of factors. But even if a lot of the projection goes wrong, we're still looking at positive net absorption. You don't hear much about the return to office anymore, the mandates, because a lot of them have already happened. You've got big firms bringing folks back. What doesn't get talked about, where are the AI people working? They're not working remotely. Go look at San Francisco's office market and it'll show that. So I think that's something that still is a lot of work that we have to get out there, is that people by and large are back in the office and as an asset class. I really do think that we have hit the bottom of that, and we're actually starting to see now a bit of an upturn on that.
Well, if I can add to that, like Marc, I'm with you on that, because I think it's also, the media drives that narrative. The media is sitting in New York City. I work in Midtown Manhattan, and it hasn't quite come back yet. But across the rest of the country, everybody went back to work. I mean, they may have only have been home for a month during the pandemic, depending on where in the country you were. So yeah, I mean, we are, some of those occupancy rates are a little bit higher than pre-pandemic, but they're not much higher. It's not like you're talking, 15, 20 percentage points. You're just talking a few percentage points higher. Or you're looking at, I read an article yesterday about DC. DC has really struggled because of all the federal workers and the mandates that go there. So the focus is on that. But across the country, as you look just not from the coasts, but you go inward, it's a vastly different story.
Well, I'm glad to keep busting the myths that the media has been spreading. I am curious, Stephanie, with you in particular, retail occupancy stays at 92, 93%, but space is still hard to find. Why do you think that is?
It's I'm actually going to quote Mark here. It is location, location, location. um, on that one. So what we are seeing some in very demand high areas, you are seeing zero space available. You're seeing occupancy rates as high as 96, 97%. I mean, we're hearing from our owner developers saying, I don't have any space. They are welcoming the Joannes and the Bed Bath and Beyonds of the world to go out of business because they can release that space. People want to be in brick and mortar space, but if you're in a bad location, you're going to see those occupancy rates drop because nobody wants to be there. And that's where, going back to talk about capital, where, redevelopment is important and being able to kind of revitalize that space and bring people into it. But yeah, we can continue to see a shortage of space, which it's a great problem to have, but we have seen very little new development over the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So moving on, I am curious, and we'll stay with you, Stephanie. So obviously, your research shows that consumer spending is still strong. However, based on everything we see, whether in the media or any articles that I'll read or any executives that I'll speak to in the CRE world, they sound more cautious and a little bit still very much in the efficiency mindset. What do you think is the disconnect between consumer confidence and institutional caution?
I think there's a lot going on there, to be honest. One of the things that we're seeing, and we are seeing, I mean, I suspect 2025 is going to see another 3.5%, 4% sales growth. And to put that in perspective, at the height of the pandemic in 2021, we saw a 16% sales growth year over year. And we have seen consistently 3 to 4% growth on top of that. That is a significant amount of spending that's happening. But if you actually break down the numbers, what you're seeing is it is a small percentage of the people doing all the spending. It is high income earners doing the majority of the spending right now. I think there's that cautious optimism, and rightfully so, because you are seeing lower income earners pulling back on their spending because they just don't have the money to do it, because housing is expensive, because groceries are expensive. That's where some of that caution comes from. As far as what Wall Street says, that's a game of craps at this point in time. You just don't know what they're going to say and why they're going to say it. And it doesn't seem to be in line. But it also, to that point, when you look at consumer sentiment, it does not match to what the spending is. So you are seeing consumers very nervous, but also still going out and spending. It's a very interesting economic environment right now.
Yeah, I'm curious, Mark and Kevin, are your members seeing different signals?
Actually, I wanted to add on what Stephanie said, because I think she's right, and maybe it's because I'm inside the Beltway here, but I do think there's an interesting dynamic at play here. We see the consumer sentiment is low, and that's clearly what the response is. But I think that that's partly, if not largely, representative of consumers now for years have been told things are bad. Things are bad, things are bad, and both parties have done this, depending on who's probably sitting more in the majority at that point. Well, what does that do? If you hear that narrative, you believe it to be true. But yet, what are we seeing? We are still seeing numbers that don't support that narrative. I'm not saying that this is at record rates, but it's a good, steady rate. And I do believe that this dynamic that's at play here, that one doesn't support the overall narrative that's out there. I'll give you a metric looking at just, from the industrial side. Stephanie can certainly speak to and did about what we're seeing in the brick and mortar side, but looking on the warehousing side, where that inventory is sitting, whether for the brick and mortar or whether for the online, vacancy rates are going down again. We're seeing more inventory come in. We're seeing more use of that space. And there are a lot of drivers behind this. But again, I don't think the economic data backs up the sentiment that sits out there.
From my seat here at RETC and NMHC, and I will be much more well informed on member sentiment at the end of this month when I go to NMHC Annual in Vegas. I would just say we're probably a little differently situated. I think our members are optimistic about 26 and going in for all the reasons we've already discussed. I think that the rental housing marketplace is a little bit more challenged because of what we've talked about already. The housing affordability challenges, the housing supply challenges we face in these communities that are really trapping people in apartments when they want to move into a single family home, but they're not able to access that line of capital or that property for a million reasons that we can spend another whole hour on. And then you have families locked out of moving up into a different segment of the rental housing marketplace, right? So I think the frustrations in the consumer space in rental housing are a little bit more unique. But to Marc's point, it really is the headwinds that we've been facing politically and economically, and the media beating people down into believing that the economy is not as strong as it appears to be numerically. I think that's been a real challenge. But I think overall, I think our members are optimistic, residents maintaining high occupancy in our properties, looking for ability to move up. And I think we're seeing changes in the rental housing landscape, just the way our members are building to meet consumer demand. So if you can't access a single family home via purchase, maybe you move to a build to rent community, right? Which is a booming segment of the market. So I think the market is shifting in this economy to meet consumer sentiment and demand.
Super insightful to kind of hear the landscape across different sectors. What's not surprising, or what I find most fascinating, is that it's somewhat similar sector to sector. Like it's very cautious optimism. It's like, yes, there's a lot of really good signals, but we're just treading lightly because maybe the marketing has told us to do so, because maybe it's prudent to do so, because maybe it's not the COVID days. But that's a lot of what I'm hearing.
Well, I think some of that sentiment rests on me. What's the number one topic from last year? Tariffs. How are consumers supposed to stay positive when all they're hearing about all day, every day is, 50% tariffs on all their goods? We didn't see a lot of that come to fruition, but that gets in your head. And that, that was mentioned, and it does. That's what's driving the sentiment down, is that's what they're hearing, and they're negative about it.
Actually, that's a perfect segue to the next round. Obviously, there's been new administration, new rules. I'm just curious to get a reaction on what we think is the biggest opportunity from policy changes.
Listen, I'm going to go with them on the permitting process and streamlining the permitting process. I mean, from a policy change, there's a lot of policy changes that can be out there, but I know even for our organization and for our members, we've been fighting this battle to streamline permits for as long as I've been here. And it's difficult, and it is costly, and it is time consuming, which is fascinating to me because that's where they're looking to make the money. When in turn, if they actually streamline that process, cut down those costs, they'd make the property tax and the sales tax money a lot sooner and a lot quicker than sitting on all these permitting fees and the long.
That's right. It's logical to do it. So I'll layer it in with two more with that same kind of, on the legislative side, government side of things. Like, what's the biggest threat? But also maybe what's the most overhyped issue?
Well, I'll go back to my initial comment when you talk about what is the biggest threat. And I really do believe it's energy. NAIOP has been working on this for a couple of years. We started to see that there was this brewing issue, and it's energy on both sides of the front. It's the production of energy, and it's also the transmission of that energy. But what you're starting to see now, Sandeep, is projects are becoming increasingly delayed. And it's because either they can't get the power that they need, just the overall amount, or it can't be distributed to them right away, and it's holding up the project. Which that delay, which is averaging about 18 months right now, you've got to go back to your pro forma. I mean, the calculus is now changed on that because you're seeing potential substantial delay. And I do think that adds as an incredible counterweight right now, and one that is unlikely to resolve itself in the immediate future.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, Marc. And you could do an entirely separate episode on the infrastructure around the electric grid.
Yes.
And how that plays into EV charging stations and mandates around that, and the aging of the grid, and that it's not equipped to handle all this extra electricity. And Marc's right on that. That's going to continue to be a growing issue in communities.
We've actually seen a lot of that in our space, and unfortunately disproportionately impact the affordable housing production. that we so desperately need. We have examples that we've provided to Capitol Hill and to the White House of where in localities that are desperately in need of low-income housing, that they're shifting massive grid, updates and infrastructure modernization onto the backs of these real estate developers, which changes the entire pro forma and then ultimately pushes the rents up in that community and then ultimately harms the population we intended to serve in the first place. So I think it's sometimes well-intended regulation that ultimately backfires and they don't necessarily see far enough down the field. But I think going back to your last question, Sandeep, about a new administration, possibly some positive momentum that doesn't get picked up in the media, right? Is that for the first time in, God, I hate to say it, but probably 30 years, we've seen a bipartisan package emerge from the Senate Banking and Housing Committee that actually is trying to address many of these barriers to housing production. It's the Road to Home Act. And when you can tell me that Senator Tim Scott, a conservative from South Carolina, and Senator Elizabeth Warren, a liberal from Massachusetts, can unanimously get a package out of not just the Senate Banking Committee, but out of the United States Senate. I mean, that is remarkable. Now,
That's a miracle.
whether or not that ever becomes the actual law of the land, I think it shows significant momentum and progress that we've all made collectively in the commercial real estate space of connecting these dots, that whether you're a liberal or conservative, the barriers to development are real in these communities. I think that's where we come at this from two prongs. One is obviously federal facing, working closely with the administration, trying to find regulatory barriers we can take down or tweak, but working with Congress too. And I think where we can leverage the federal purse or the federal power to encourage localities to start moving in this direction, I think that's the best path we have, because that state and local landscape can be as daunting and challenging as what we face here in Washington.
Kevin, to your point, half of the battle is education, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we face this problem. We talk about 1031 like kind exchanges and whatnot, whereas everybody thinks it's Wall Street or billionaires doing all of this. And the reality is that's not the case at all. And the dollars do really matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only thing I was going to add is that it's not a quick, easy fix. It's not a band-aid. It's these slow, anytime it goes back to the regulation, it's nice and slow, but it's a lot of hard work of a lot of people, like many of your all's organization and the education that you do to kind of help move these things forward slowly but surely, which I think is super exciting. All right. So let's switch gears a little bit back to AI. Stephanie, one of the things that you said in a recent interview was those who don't know AI will be replaced. Kevin, obviously pushing governance, and Marc's, your members are buying it. So I'd be curious to get specific. If there's one way AI is actually changing deals today, what do we think it is? And Marc, because you were the contrarian originally and rated it at 3 in terms of optimism of how much AI is going to impact us, why don't you go first and tell us one way that you think AI can actually change deals today?
Look, I think on the research side, it has a tremendous impact here. You can compile comps, you can compile regulatory data quite quickly. What used to take a researcher days, if not weeks, there are AI platforms out there that can be utilized to provide that information in hours now. Unquestionably, that can help and is helping. We've seen that with projects, and I hear more and more of our members looking to that as well too. I mean, everybody wants to be more efficient. My contrarian just comes out of, again, there's a lot out there. We're still trying to figure out what works, but there are things such as what I just mentioned that are working now. And I do believe that there will be other elements of the development process that can and will be positively impacted by the abilities of AI.
Stephanie, what do you think? What's one specific way?
Well, I think it's, again, I firmly believe that it's not AI that's going to replace the person. It's the person who knows AI, because it can do so many different things for you. And to Marc's point, it is an incredible way to analyze a lot of data in a very short amount of time. Now, to Marc's earlier point, garbage in is garbage out. So you have to make sure that that underlying data is good. But the amount of data you can now take, whether it be mobile phone usage and demographics and market rates and things like that, and put into and have AI give you something, I think that's what's going to kind of change how deals are done. I think it's just that what knowledge is gained to go into making the deal will be quicker and maybe even more in depth than what a human could previously do. And that's how it's going to really kind of change the landscape there.
And that's the nuance I want to call out here, Stephanie, with what you just said, is it's not that AI will replace humans. It's humans that use AI will be far more equipped. I think that's a really important nuance that gets missed a lot of the times. And I think it's really, really worth almost overemphasizing it, which is why I'm doing it. But basically, both of you, Mark and Stephanie, it's data crunching is the one way that it can help deals now.
Yeah.
Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, much of the same. I think, when you look at the rental housing development process or financing, I think we're seeing huge strides in that fintech or development space on using AI to speed up zoning review, entitlement processes, site, selection, all of that. There's some super incredible platforms out there, not to name any specifically, that will enable a developer to go in, look at a really dense zoning map and come out 4 minutes later with a really impressive schema that will tell them you can build X number of units at 30% AMI, X number of units at 50, and really map out what would have taken months in a matter of minutes. So we're really hopeful on that side. I think for us, where we're seeing probably the biggest strides at this point are really in the operations space. And we've heard some really incredible things from our leaders about just the unsexy AI. There's so much focus on the consumer side at this point, but using so much on the back office. Kettler, one of our larger property managers based here in the Washington area, has made significant strides. And, I can share data on how much they've actually saved, but leveraging AI in invoicing and back office, huge amounts of not just time savings, but cost savings. I think that ultimately improves the valuations that we're all facing. And I think it's probably just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Well, and I'd add on to that, Kevin, because you raised a good point on that back office type of stuff. I know
Yeah.
for us, when we submit our expense reports now, we can upload a receipt and it's AI reading that receipt to populate all the fields in the expense report. So I don't have to spend as much time doing it. So it's actually a time saver for me. It doesn't threaten anybody's job, but it has done that. Now, is it perfect? No, but it is this fantastic thing where all of a sudden it knows the dollar amount. It knows that I was dining. It knows all these things, and it saves me time.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I'll give
Yeah,
you just one example that
please.
Kettler gave me recently when they deployed this AI invoicing solution via Yardi. It was pre-AI. It would take them 7 days to process an invoice. Post, it's 1 day. So 86% faster, 86% staff time saved. Manually created invoices went from 41% down to 14%. So you can see it's just like a huge time saver. But in multifamily and rental, what that means is we're enabling these folks to be more human in other aspects of their job where we need them to be the touch points for so many millions of Americans that call apartments home.
Yes, yes, yes. Across the board, yes. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone loves doing their expense sheet fill
Yeah.
out. That's the least joyous part of any business travel.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah.
So let's bring it home, y'all. We're right here coming to the final segment. For everyone that's watching, there's a lot that we've discussed today. Everything from policy to optimism to AI to capital. One piece of advice for everyone that's watching, something maybe perhaps actionable that they should walk away with today as we sit at the beginning of 2026, full of optimism, cautious optimism in some cases, but optimism indeed. What's one piece of actionable advice that folks could walk away with? Kevin, maybe you want to kick us off?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I get a lot of times is questions from the C-suite across rental housing on how to approach AI, how to talk knowledgeably on it. We've seen this in the policy space, certainly. It's okay to admit that you don't know the answer, that you're still in early research mode. But to let that fear stop your teams from testing or piloting, that's a risk that's going to come back to bite you if you don't employ them. So I've always encouraged, our C-suite leaders to really lean in, get smart, try to give your teams leeway and expense, knowing that, as I said at the beginning of this, the return may not come in a quarter or the first half of the year. In the long run, leveraging tech and AI or other emerging tools is only going to be a net plus. And we need to really come into it with that mindset.
Love it. Mark, what do you think?
If we're talking strictly to a commercial real estate audience here, we really need to be mindful of what's happening in the legislative and regulatory environment. And look, they're two separate things. We all remember I'm just a bill. That's the easy, sexy part on the legislation. But regulation, we talked about it earlier, but I'll emphasize it again because I'll still go back to my point about energy. And this is something that we have to be actionable about because everyone's project will be impacted by this. This is not a data center issue. This is not an industrial issue. It's not multifamily. It's every asset class. It's single family and it's voters. People are going to vote this year. And this is going to be an issue that's going to be at the forefront of some campaigns. We just saw it, particularly in the New Jersey gubernatorial election. Important energy was in the debate between Governor Sherrill and her opponent. And this is where I think we're going to need to be more proactive than ever as an industry, particularly on the state and local level. That's where the rubber is going to hit the road this year.
Love it. Stephanie, what's the wisdom that you're imparting upon us?
So I'm not a huge fan of the phrase lean in, but I'm going to say lean in. Lean into that technology, lean into that AI. I'm a huge advocate for creating efficiencies in your work life, in your personal life. Go play around with it, try it out, see what it can do. It might trigger something of, oh, we could use it for this, and that would free up this person to do some other project. I mean, we've looked at it a little bit like there's all these projects we want to do, but we had these humans doing other things. We were able to kind of use AI to take some of that off their plates, and now they can do the things that we want to do to service our members better. So really check it out. I mean, check it out on a personal level and then think about how you can apply it to your work life. It doesn't have to be a significant, capital investment, and it doesn't have to take somebody's job, but you'd be surprised at what it can do. Honestly, how quickly it does learn. It's fascinating to watch that. And I think it also takes away some of the fear of it and understanding, oh my gosh, this is actually really good. And it cuts down on my extra brain power I have to use to think through something.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, 3 perspectives, 1 industry, and infinite possibilities. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Stephanie, for keeping it real, keeping it relevant, and keeping us all on our toes. Remember their wisdom, challenge their predictions, and let's see who's coming right in December. This has been such a pleasure, you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much
Sandy.
for having us.